All right. I see the little record button flashing, so I'm going to assume everything is great. So hi, everybody. Welcome to Eat, Drink, and Be Indie. Thank you for tuning in. Tonight, we are talking about the Creative Conference, kind of a preview of the Creative Conference, which is funny because I'm really not sure what I'm going to do yet. As you guys know, the festival was going to be in the spring. I had a complete lineup in the spring that I thought was fantastic. And then the world imploded in a lot of different ways. And we moved the festival. And now I really want to talk a lot more about, everybody's curious about how are we getting back to work and what is it like to be on set? And there's a lot of misinformation out there on testing and on other things. So the Creative Conference is going to be very different this year than I think it has been in the past. I am trying to do some more one-on-ones this year in addition to COVID stuff. So I kind of look at what I'm doing in kind of two tracks. So we're going to kind of have the COVID conference and then kind of a back to basics conference. So I'm working with the Screen Actors Guild to put together a panel that talks basically about what's happening with SAG. What are the SAG contracts look like? There's a lot of misinformation out there. Well, should you be signing a COVID waiver? And, what are the requirements? Who is supposed to provide PPE? There's all kinds of misinformation out there. So I'm talking to, hopefully Melissa will be able to join us to talk about kind of the contract side. And then I want some casting agents to talk about, what they're hearing from their actors in production. And then Susan, who works at SAG, is kind of the person who's checking in on the implementation of everything. So we're kind of hitting the front end and the back end. So I'm excited about that stuff. I'm really planning on doing a lot more one-on-one things, kind of like this conversation with Molly Coffee tonight. The challenge with Zoom calls is if you have too many people, it's just utter chaos. So I'm really trying to keep any kind of panels or masterclass conversations, workshops very small. But I thought we'd kind of kick off the COVID conversations with Molly, who's been working on commercials and is always very active in the independent film community and trying to convince independent filmmakers not to be COVIDiots and mask holes and do things properly so they give us a good name. But I will kind of pepper in throughout our conversation some of the marquee names that I have gotten. There's a couple people who are on the fence who I can't talk about, but I'm so excited I can't stand it. The great thing about everybody being unemployed is that there are a lot of people, I can't fly people in from LA and New York. We just don't have the budget. But there's all these people now that I can get online if they're not in production. Or on a weekend. For instance, Rob Hardy, who was part of Rainforest Films, and now he and Will Packer are off doing their own things. But Rob is actually going up to New York to quarantine for 2 weeks to do some bubble shooting on a TV show that they had started before all this mess hit. And he's going to be able to do something for me probably on a weekend. And weekends have been things that we haven't been able to do either. So normally I put Rob on a panel about directing for television, but he's been pitching, he's been creating shows, he's a producer, he's a director, kind of a triple threat in a lot of ways. And I've known Rob since we were both PAs back when, early 90s when we both first moved here, we met. So I'm excited to have Rob Hardy on, but I'm more excited to have Molly Coffee on right this minute. Hi, Molly. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. Things are great.
You are lying, but that is okay. I'm like, good thing you aren't an actor.
Yeah, it's a weird time for everybody, I think. We're all trying to figure out what the new normal is. And, I am I've been very lucky that I've been able to do a handful of commercials during this time, that kind of just pop in and pop out. And luckily with unemployment, as they're working everything out, they've been really good. I just report my wages, and then the next week when I'm no longer working anymore, I just claim again. And so in that regard, it's almost like the sweet spot to be living in, to be able to do commercials. But the kind of shows that I normally production design are like the tier 0 and tier 1 union shows that are smaller and are, as we're seeing, are having like are going to continue to have the hardest time coming back during this time. Like, it's really easy for Marvel to spend $3 million redoing the ventilation in Pinewood, but that's not the reality for like a lot of shows.
That's kind of been a big concern for me. And we'll get to the challenges of starting up the union stuff, because there's still challenges. JD was on a show that they had gotten a month into prep on. It shut down in the middle of March, and they were going to come back in July, and then they were going to come back in August, and then they were going to come back in September. And last week they finally pulled the plug. They just, it was a smaller movie. I don't know the budget. I'm going to guess it might have been around 28 to 30 million. I honestly have no idea. It could have been smaller than that. But I know it was I know the length of prep and the length of the shoot. It was a football movie though. So, they were going to go to Oklahoma and shoot back when they thought Oklahoma had less cases. So now the cases have exploded in Oklahoma. But it was a football movie with a bunch of crowd stadium shots. So they took a lot of money out of the budget that they were going to use for extras and wardrobe and makeup and all that and put it into VFX, but they still were just coming up short. And then, you've got football players who are breathing each other's faces, getting in close contact. You've got to quarantine everybody. And I think, God bless Tyler Perry and his ability to quarantine everyone. I'm so glad that my friends are working and they're staying safe. But not everybody can quarantine, and even quarantine leaves people, if you've got kids, if you've got pets. Quarantine is only really truly available for some people. But I'm seeing a lot of people posting about independent films, and there are people who I wouldn't have worked for or let my PAs from the PA Academy work on their projects before COVID. And I'm seeing all the same people pop up like, oh, we're going to take care of you. And I'm thinking, you don't even have the money to feed them lunch or get a real camera. How the hell are you going to keep people safe? How are you seeing, with FIG and what you guys are doing, how are you seeing all that?
Well, part of it, is that everybody's got to kind of figure out what their comfort level is and make a decision, an informed decision, and ask a bunch of questions at the beginning about what people are doing. Because, some people feel like they're young enough and strong enough that like they can take on a little more risk when going into them, where other people can't. One of the people who works for me as my art department coordinator for like the last 4 years, her son has autism and is immunocompromised. So, she's pretty much accepted she will not be working for a very, very long time, because that's like her comfort level. Yeah. So, testing is the thing that one makes it, is really scary in all of this, because it's the thing that indie productions really just can't take on. I had a phone call with SAG actually last week. It was kind of funny because I was like, hey, we have this feature film, Kaylee, that we've been trying to make forever. What if I take 10 people and bubble in the woods in North Georgia? What does this look like? And at the end of the day, we still have to test once a week, no matter the fact that we're inside a quarantine bubble. Testing is just not available. So not on like the scale of what we need and being able to turn around things. And we can't afford to like bring our own COVID person in to like do tests and whatnot. So it just makes it, no matter what we wanted to do, and no matter how, small we wanted to go to try to make it work, it just made it like financially where we can't afford to do it. So then you start getting into this world of, okay, well then you're either making things with non-union actors, or, and I can't fault SAG,
SAG is like our front line. Like, yeah, no offense to your union or all the other unions out there, but if it wasn't for SAG, like laying down the damn law, God, I don't even know how Melissa is dealing with the craziness. I can't even imagine what it must be like to have to be the front line in that conversation and hold tough in it, Yeah. But if it wasn't for SAG, I think there would be a whole lot more ugliness out there with people getting back to work and not doing things properly.
Absolutely. But my union brothers and sisters who are members of IATSE have been turning to SAG to get them to come in and address things that are happening on their set. So I definitely don't want to knock them, but it's also hard. Tough. It's hard to ignore the fact that they have created this barrier that gets really scary for indie filmmakers and like where we fit into all of that and like how we move forward. So, so all of that being said, what a lot of people are doing, even like on a commercial scale, is, you know, they're doing temperatures, you know, and then and I wouldn't even say that it's a waiver. It's more like there's this form that we got that said that you have to sign. It's like a medical thing that you sign every day, or like you fill it in on Google. It's like a Google document that you have to do every day before you come to set. That says, you know, that I have not gone out and partied all weekend. I haven't been around anyone in the last 14 days that's been diagnosed with COVID, as far as I know. And then you get to set, you sit in the parking lot, and they come around and they like take your temperature. Like you don't even get out of your car until they take your temperature. But again,
but that's not enough. I mean, my problem with the temperature check is there's plenty of people I personally know who were ill, who never had a temperature.
Yes.
And who spread it to their family members or didn't have a temperature while they were still spreading it. I mean, I think that's the scary, confusing, messed up part, is we don't know enough about all this crap. Testing is a hot mess. And by the way, to tease one of the things that we're doing, I will have Gabby and Trish coming in to talk about testing. They're actually, I think, down at Pinewood on a shoot that starts maybe tomorrow, which will finish right before, and I think it airs during the Creative Conference or about the week before. But because the two of them have been the ones not administering tests, but organizing the tests, figuring out what tests work and what doesn't. I'm going to bring them on to kind of give us up to date. Obviously, there's been a couple of new tests that they say are coming out that are these rapid tests, but I'm interested to hear what they can add to the conversation about what they've found out, you know, as people on the front line. So that's another little tease that we'll have.
And things are evolving so quickly. I mean, you know, the world that we're living in right now is a different world that we were living in a month ago. And by the time the Creative Conference comes around in a month, you know, things could even look really different but it all comes back to people deciding what, you know, level of risk they're willing to take. Yeah. And it's really going to come down to people standing up for themselves and asking lots of questions. And then the other big part of it that I think is really important is, even on an indie level, we have to have some sort of avenue in place where people can express discomfort, you know, can say, hey, somebody did this thing without having any fear of repercussions of them. You know, it's hard on an indie level to make things like truly anonymous. Yeah. But there has to be something in place where people can report things without feeling like they're going to lose their jobs.
Well, and I think that even if you're on a non-union set, it's my understanding that that's what all these safety hotlines exist for. Mm-hmm. Now, are you risking the chance that a union might come in and shut down or flip your show? You absolutely are. But what are the ramifications if you get a whole bunch of people sick and kill somebody? You know, talk about a career ender. So, you know, I mean, I think these hotlines exist for a reason. I mean, I know I told all the kids in the PA Academy, I gave them all the SAG hotline and all the safety hotline numbers and said, put them in your phone. So if you're on set, you see something, you try to address it, everybody ignores you. Other people are in agreement. You're not just like the crazy outlier, because, you know, that's the other thing. You know, this level of what you're comfortable with. I mean, some people are like, don't get within 50 feet of me. And if you are, you must wear a mask outside. And it's like, meh. You know, so how people are reacting to, I mean, we all see this on social media. Like, some of our friends have lost their minds, and not on the conspiracy side, just on they're so afraid of getting sick that they're getting a little too angry, anxious, and crazy in their posts. And that isn't helpful either, you know? So what one person perceives as a risk might not actually be a risk. Mm-hmm. So you know, there does need to be somebody that you can talk to. And that's a challenge with indies. We don't have medics on set. They aren't going to be able to afford somebody who actually knows something about, you know, COVID protocols. I mean, I think that I haven't looked at the Georgia Film Academy's class, but they made that free finally, which I was very happy about that, the kind of COVID certification. There are others out there. I posted those to all my PA Academy classes as well, because, it's like, look, even if you don't want to be the person who is cleaning or the person who is a coordinator, COVID coordinator, or any of these positions, you should know what to expect. You should know what is going to happen on set. You should know what is right and what is wrong and what is a danger. So make sure you take these classes just for your own safety coming back. Is your union offering anything like that? Are you guys having any kind of things that 479 is doing?
Well, actually, the costumers union is actually having something, I think, Thursday evening that members of IATSE 479 got access to. So there, and that's kind of from a costumer's point of view of COVID-19 safety. There is a safety class that we can also take. I think IATSE has been very slow, I think, and cautious to react to everything and what their stance is. I know that this week, Mike is going to send out an email to everyone that kind of really digs down on how we have a responsibility to all of our union brothers and sisters to act right on the weekends.
Yeah.
And that if you take on a job and say yes to a job, that no matter what you think about masks or COVID-19 or anything like that, that you have to meet the requirements of employment of that job, whatever those safety requirements are. And just that we'll have, if we end up as a state going down again, the film industry is going to have an even harder time coming back up again. So we all just have a responsibility to our brothers and sisters to not go out to parties and not go out to no mask concerts and things like that. It's just use common sense.
Yeah. And I saw your post about that today. And the other thing I thought was super important is letting them know when you get a job, because there have been people that you and I know that shall remain nameless, but there have been shows that people were starting work and they had no contract. And the unions were waiting for SAG to negotiate the contract before they came in behind them. But people were working. They were working without PPE. They were working without proper protocols. Now, some of the shows that I know about were those lower tier shows. I cannot speak about some of the higher level shows, but, construction people were working on shows that didn't have contracts yet. And that is not good. Those contracts need to get done. You need to know what your rights are before walking in. You need to know what is appropriate. And by the way, I want to add, people are adding into the chats. I saw Melissa added the protocols that you guys put together. I saw that Matt added something, and there's a couple other things. So check the chat bar. And by the way, if you guys have questions, apparently you're supposed to be, I have no idea how you do this, but apparently somewhere there's a raise your hand function. So we are going to take questions. Oh, there it is. It's over to the right. I just saw it. Raise your hand. So invite, mute me, and raise your hand under the participants list. So if you raise your hand, I might not get to you immediately, but if you raise your hand, hopefully I'll be able to figure out how to go to you so you can ask a question.
Yeah, Jermaine was just saying that the costumer class was today, so I missed it. But he said that they talk a lot about what masks are effective, which is really good. But people are trying. IATSE 479 is going to be more cautious than most when it comes to taking a stance on anything.
Yeah,
I think.
Well, it's tough because you don't want to be too standoffish. Or too tough, like some may say SAG is, but all of those things are necessary. But let's, I know that, so I want to jump into commercials, and that will lead into our conversation about what you've seen PPE-wise getting back to work on in commercial world. I will add music videos are another thing that has been back up and running. I know I got a text this morning from A.B. Cooper telling me that he just did a big music video where they shut down. They had, it looked like, I didn't actually look at the car, but it looked like one of the Porsches that have the So yeah, all my film words are gone. Like I don't take jobs and then I forget what everything is called. Techno crane on the top of it, the Porsche Techno Craney thing, my favorite toy, was cruising, you know, they were basically cruising downtown all over the place. And it was, you know, they landed a helicopter on a building for something. So, you know, music videos are back. I know there've been 2 that have shot up the street from me in Grant Park. We kept seeing Grips walk up the street and we're like, JD's like, does that look like Grips to you? I'm like, dude, I mean, even without a tool belt, you know, that's a grip. And sure enough, we're like, hey, what are you guys working on? They're like, oh, we're gripping on a music video. And apparently I think they had 2 or 3 that week. So smaller music videos are back, commercials are back. You know, some live events are kind of ish back, reality shows, of course. You know, I know that there's a lot of situations where people are setting up, you know, dropping off camera gear to their reality show talent, and the talent is setting things up, and, you know, they're using simple lights. But talk about commercials and what you see. I mean, were these 10 people? Obviously, don't say any names. Don't get anybody in trouble.
Yeah, well, I mean, we really are. It's kind of interesting because again, talking about like comfort level and things like that. I understand on like an indie level, the reaction is like, okay, we need to reduce the amount of people, so that we just have like a handful of people. From an art department perspective, in particular, that's actually kind of counterintuitive, because we kind of need more people in our department in order to make this happen. Like we have, basically the way I've been running my sets is I have a group of people that are like our out crew.
Yeah.
And then the group of people that are the in crew and actually work with the shooting crew. And the out crew never interacts with the in crew, because you don't want art department people that are out shopping and going to shops and interacting with prop places and things like that to then be interacting with your shooting crew. So they're essentially going out, picking up stuff, bringing it in. And either like on a commercial level, we're even like dressing the sets, walking away from them, then shooting crew comes in and shoots. And, you know, we have to have a lot of adjust our communication and how we plan things. I'm having to do a lot more things up front so that everybody knows every little thing that we're doing, so that, you know, we can get pre-approval on it. And on a commercial,
that's my question. How's that pre-approval should go?
Well, on a commercial level, it is somewhat working, because between clients and agencies and things like that, they want to see so much up front anyway.
But they never make a decision up front that matches the decision on the day when you get somebody in wardrobe and you put them in. I mean, over the, I think 4 commercials you said you did, how many changes did you see that were pre-approved?
We didn't change much. I mean, we moved stuff around, but we didn't have like a whole bunch of stuff standing by to come as options. You know, we kind of skipped all of that, which
that's good.
I think, and I will also say though that my actual budgets to work with have been a lot tighter, and they've made it very clear that there's no wiggle room, and I have to assume that's because they're having so many more costs, you know, with testing and things like that, you know. So
I think they were talking, the number I heard, I think it was a Directors Guild conversation, was that generally speaking, it adds 20% to your budget.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. For those of you who don't budget, 20% of the entire budget, that's a chunk of change. That's basically your payroll.
So, so we've been, now I mean, I don't believe for one second that will translate though to television and film, like the lack of changes and things like that. But again, if you really are going to function with zones and like that idea that everybody's functioning under, then those people can't be around shooting crew. So it is not an option. And I mean, I would love for this to actually change the way we make films from here on out. You know,
from your mouth to whomever's ears.
Yeah, I would love for it to be an actual change.
Were you handling props as well, or were you just set dressing? Or were you production, like, because I assume the props pod is completely different. That's kind of like the A pod, or you've got your AD, your director, your script supervisor, like the people who are in touch with actors also don't mix with kind of the in crowd or the out crowd.
Yeah, so we've been
3 pods.
We've been functioning with essentially 2. So I will I'll be with shooting crew, and I will be with, and then I will have like basically 2 people with me, and they're kind of on set dressing and doing props both. But I make sure that I'm always with shooting crew, because one thing, I tried to not be on the very first one, and I figured out that I couldn't not be there because they just didn't trust the information. I have the ability to be more firm with them about the wanting to change things, than someone else might be that's in my crew. So
Well,
yeah.
you're used to those conversations. I mean, that's part of your job, having those fun conversations where you get to tell people in power no. They don't generally listen, but it's nice to do. It's fun.
Yeah, so it's been me +2 is like with shooting crew, and then my set decorator +3 or +2 is kind of the go out and like shopping and pickups and things like that. So running with 5 when normally we probably would have ran with, no, we're running with 6 when we probably would have ran with 4 before, on those commercials. So it's not like a ton, but it definitely makes a difference.
Yeah. Everybody complains about wearing masks all the time, which to me is crazy. I don't understand it. Like, I spent 8 hours in my attic in Florida, and it was 100 degrees up there cleaning up bat poop. So I had an N95 mask on. Now, granted, I had to take breaks every so often, but I've spent a lot of time in masks over this winter because my bat poop thing was a problem that took a little bit longer than I thought to. You missed it if you didn't get my live stream where I captured bats. That was good fun. But I mean, I just put it on. I literally will put it on before I even leave the house. I don't wait till I get somewhere. I just put it on, walk out, drive around, like do all my errands and just keep it on the whole time. So every time I hear people complaining, I'm like, I can barely breathe and that's a good thing. But what are some of the things, just habits? I mean, at first everything seems like everybody's really careful and nobody wants to touch anything. But I have a feeling that over time, all of us go back to our old bad habits. That's a really big, like, nodding of your head. So
no, 100%. I mean, even, just like little things, like one of the commercials that I worked on, we were outside on a hill. We had 2 actors that were sitting on top of a car, kind of like looking out, kind of like the overlook scene in La La Land. And it was actually really impressive what they did. They had a big techno crane that was over the car. So they would rehearse with masks on, and they would do all the, rehearse everything. Then, and not everyone can do this. I will preface that. They would rehearse with masks on. Then they would fly in, essentially like a big piece of plexi on a C-stand, and they would have that there the whole time that they were shooting. The whole time that the actors had their masks off, they had that plexi in there, and then they would do a plate and remove the plexi in post. But what would happen is, we have a blanket that's like sitting on the car. And, by hour 9 or whatever that you're there, we would want to like run in and just adjust the blanket, because that's like what we do, make sure that it's perfect every time. But poor Nelson, our AD, would like fuss at us all the time because they would tell us to go in and fix the blanket. So we would jump in to fix the blanket, not thinking about it. And he'd be like, no, the actors have to put their mask back on before you enter in the 6 feet of them. And we're so set to like try to do things as quickly as possible. And it's like the best of intentions, but it just, it's hard.
Do you find that you're getting the actors more engaged in your job, kind of from a props or set dress? I mean, because they're there, it's a hell of a lot easier to say, hey, can you adjust that thing? I mean, unless you're trying to be artsy with it. Like, I get it. Like, I couldn't make a curtain like look perfect if my life depended on it. You guys can come in and just fluff and it looks amazing. But, are you relying on the actors more to do that stuff for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It makes me a little like we've had really good people so far. So it's hasn't been that big of a deal. I just think of all the nightmare problems that I've had with people that would pick up things and never set them back down in the same place. And I know that experience is coming, but yeah, everyone's been really, really good about everything so far. I know people, like someone who did a music video recently, and so they wanted to have someone kiss in it, so they cast the significant other of the actor, so that that was the person that they were kissing. It's it's hard and it slows things down. I think that's the other thing that everyone needs to realize is that we have to work a whole lot more time into our schedules to take into consideration all of these things. Because if we can't be on top of each other doing our jobs, you don't realize how much we work on top of each other until you can't anymore. If the grips have to go in and then the electricians and then you're talking about 4 times the amount of time that it took before to do anything.
And I think that's probably one of the big reasons why JD's job went away. They had a tight schedule to begin with. It was really going to be a challenge to meet their schedule. And, they kept cutting days and cutting days and cutting days to try to pay for other things. And JD's like, I can't do this pre-COVID, this is going to take twice as long. And it was just too small of a movie to add a couple extra weeks. And I think that's going to be the other thing that, leads to challenges for independent films. I mean, the big films, again, if the studio is willing to pay the money because it's a tentpole movie, another 10 million for something, that's not a problem for them. But I think for independent filmmakers, it's that time thing, I mean, you can't afford to shoot 5 days, let alone turn that into 8 or 10 days. And that, that's on top of all the other protocols. What are some, I know you've been very vocal about the fact that, well, as you should, because literally reading all of these different COVID protocols, I'm like, what department is missing? Oh, art department. I think part of everybody is having a hard time understanding why art department has turned into the, no offense, redheaded stepchild. But it's mostly because you guys are your own department. Like you have your own coordinator, you have your own, office PA and an art PA. So, there's the production office and then there's the art department. And, unless we're going over there to like hit on the set dressers or something, like we don't ever go over there, unless, or sometimes you have better snacks. But, generally speaking, production does not run the art department. Just like you guys, unless you'd been working in our world, wouldn't know how our office runs. So I think there aren't a lot of people that have been putting these things together that are as heavily involved in art department as they should. And you guys are so huge, you have just construction itself, let alone set dressers, props, and all the other, food styling. I mean, all this stuff. Is there going to be a protocol that comes out that addresses art department from, the production designer union or, because I know they're not part of 479 or anybody within 479 working on something like that? Or are we just throwing y'all to the wolves?
Yeah, I no one's going to come out with anything. I really don't think the Art Directors Guild is good. They would kind of be the one, but I don't even think that they will, because even within, the production designers, art directors, set designers, graphic designers, those are Art Directors Guild, but then set deck and props are IATSE. So, I don't think anything will ever come out that directly addresses it. We all are trying to talk as much as possible and communicate within ourselves, to make sure that we're kind of giving each other ideas about what the problems are as we all roll back up, and even answer a lot of questions that production companies might have about us rolling back up. But yeah, they don't really, I still don't think that anybody knows what our jobs are. Even like, you can't look at art department as one group. Like you have to look at, because we have construction is separate, paint is separate, set deck is separate, props are separate, and then you have the fact, like I said, that we're like going out and shopping and we're interacting with the outside world. Like talking about the Tyler Perry thing, one of the interesting things that came out, like talking to people about the quarantine bubble and how that whole thing went down, because they did still have a set deck department that was not part of that quarantine bubble, that was out shopping. And the thing is that there is a certain amount of risk involved with being that person, the person who is out and interacting with lots of people. If we ever get to the point that we're doing contact tracing, that's a whole nother world of problem, because now we have to assume that decorators or buyers or set dressers are going to have to go down because they went into a shop that someone tested positive. And so what is the you know, how do we pay those people for that time that they're down, or budget that in, you know, or pay them some sort of bumped pay, you know, that's like a risk kind of pay, because that didn't happen. You know, those people that were out shopping for Tyler Perry's show were not only like not paid more, but they were also technically paid less because they weren't paid the money for being inside of a quarantine bubble. Like those people got per diems and things like that. So technically,
so the people taking the risks didn't get the benefits in some ways. Yeah.
And I don't think anyone, I mean, we are so slow to try to figure out how, you know, the unions right now are just trying to figure out how to get people to pay the wages for the time that you spend going to get testing before production starts. Yeah. You know, and they're having to negotiate that on a contract by contract basis. Like they can't just say everyone has to pay for 4 hours of testing or 8 hours of testing ahead of time. So, you know, they're trying to figure that out. So, I mean, I think that our department would be a long time before any kind of like thing is set by the unions or guidelines for it. But it comes down to us as the art department communicating with each other, making demands, and just speaking up on like what we need to do the jobs. But you know, the big thing that I haven't personally experienced that I'm really, really worried about more than anything is, you know, getting access to a set on a stage. You know, if construction has to build the set, then paint has to paint it. Then rigging grips and electrics have to get in to rig it. Then set deck get in and dress it. I mean, I would say half of the time that we have a stage set deck is in there dressing a set, and then, you know, rigging comes in and is like, well, you got to move all that stuff out because we have to get lift in here to like hang lights in the ceiling. It's just like, we've never ever been able to organize access to a set, like in all the years that I've been doing this. So I mean, this idea that we're going to do it, it's really scary to me. And, you know, it's really going to show, I think, a lot of people's lack of experience in doing their jobs. You know, art directors are really going to have to pick up the slack of like planning and organizing and communicating with other departments. And a lot of the art directors locally, I don't think, have the cojones to do that job. Like the job is going to change for them quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I think that art department's one of the last things that people are going to figure out, because we haven't figured out how to even roll up and get started, really.
Yeah. I mean, you know, you talked earlier about, well, if the business shuts back down here, it's going to be even harder to get it back going. But I think that's the same for New York and LA. I mean, everybody's trying to get back to work. We've seen how many colleges this week start, and then, you know, Notre Dame shut down, UNC shut down, you know, Cherokee County, half their schools, if not all the damn school system shut down. So we've all seen how this is going to play out. Like, I just assumed that none of us would work in 2021. And I know that's a horrible thing to say. I mean, I've got friends, you know, there are more than one email from PA Academy kids who have been homeless, or are homeless, or are facing homelessness. I think we all know people who are going through that, which breaks my heart. I mean, I'm very lucky. Like, we have money set aside because we always expect there to be a strike. Like, you know, expect the 10-month strike. But
that's the reality that a lot of people haven't lived. You know, I think about
the new people. Yeah.
I think about 10 years ago or 11 years ago when I got in, like, you worked on indie shows for free to prove that you could do the job. And then if you were lucky, you got in on some shows and you would go through gaps. Like, there was a time that nobody worked from like December to middle of February. You know, the industry just didn't exist during that time. You very often went months between jobs because that's just what it was. And if you joined the union in the last 4 years, you've only seen the gold rush of production.
Oh yeah. And you bought a big house, and you bought a big fancy truck, and you bought your wife a car, and you bought yourself a boat. And, you know, I mean, I literally saw over the last 3 to 4 years, people just on these crazy spending sprees. You know, I mean, I still have the same Honda that I've been driving. I mean, I just sadly inherited a car when JD's dad died, but you know, that's why I inherited, because I had the oldest car. But you know, I drive cars until they explode on the highway when I'm driving 70 miles an hour. Like, you don't buy fancy shit. If it works, it works. And I could have moved into a bigger house, and I decided not to do that because I know I've been around long enough to know what these industry ups and downs are like. But you know, all the things that you've just talked about from an indie perspective and from a big feature, sure, Marvel has the money to pod everybody and quarantine everybody. It's not going to work. Like, maybe I'm crazy and I don't want to shut our industry down just by talking like this. But in my head, I'm a producer. I've done that for 15, 20 years. Production supervisor, logistics, production manager, like that's my thing. I figure out the worst case scenario and how to plan for it. I don't know how anybody's going to get back to work in any real sense and make it work. Tyler Perry made it work because it's a 2-week shoot. Yeah. You know, I mean, even, well, I can't say whose show it was. So someone else is going into another quarantine. And their thing is they're putting everybody in quarantine just to see what's going to happen. And if everybody makes it through quarantine, then they're going to start up production. But they're quarantining everybody for 2 weeks and seeing if they have enough people who make it out of quarantine to actually start a show. And if not, they're going to cancel it back down. I just don't see, unless you're shooting outside, Molly, how can you can't go in and work 12 hours on a set. I don't care what the ventilation is like. It's just, are you going to ventilate over everybody's head? Like, it just, I can't make it work in my head. Like, and this is what I do. So the challenges you've talked about getting things up and running, I mean, do you really believe we're going to be coming back in any real sense without fast, accurate testing and or a vaccine?
No. And I have, for the most part, I think people are really cautious, and I think that they don't think that we're going to be up anytime soon. It's more interesting when you see the unions talking about how much work is currently rolling up and how we're right around the corner, or even the film office and Kemp's office, and they make these big statements about how we're like right around the corner, 45 shows are going to be shooting, and it's not the reality. But at the same time, people do have to be the canaries in the mine to figure out how all of this is going to work. And when that's the case, it's back to that thing where everyone has to figure out what they are and aren't comfortable with. If you say yes to working a show, you need to realize that you are being a canary in the coal mine to like figure out how this is going to work.
Yeah, I am not going to say, I mean, I love JD's paychecks. He's a DGA first AD. Those are nice paychecks. I know he misses them greatly. I mean, he took off the first part of the year and then started back right when quarantine hit, so, but I was pretty relieved that his job in Oklahoma wasn't going to happen, because it wasn't just canary in the coal mine. He's a pod. The director's never going to go talk to, he's going to be the guy. The first AD is going to be the one who's talking to everybody, who in many senses is just as at risk as the person on the outside of the pods. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that commercials and music videos here are what keep people busy. I mean, honestly, if the commercial market comes back relatively strong, the people who actually live and work here, for the most part, could do pretty well. I mean, so many people, I think, that kind of relocated to work here went back to, unless they bought a house and had literally relocated, most of them went back to where they are. I mean, I'd be interested to see, and maybe how many people are literally in 479 who reside here full time and are looking for work.
Well, if you ask them, all of them. Well, but considering that only not 100% are registered to vote here, that should tell you something. Yeah. One thing that we didn't talk about with the commercials that I do want to address, that's one of the more interesting changes, and I think does also affect budget, is tech scouts.
Oh, absolutely.
Because one,
What a nightmare.
Yeah. So the way that we've been doing them is the Tech Scout is literally me, the location manager, and the production coordinator, and that's it. Everyone else is on like Zoom or like they have but that also means that they take forever. Like where they used to take a long time, like they take forever. And then the other thing is that because the people aren't seeing the sets, you have to assume that you're going to have like 20
more gear. Yeah.
In case something comes up. But yeah, like we've been doing Tech Scouts are literally just me, the location manager, and the production coordinator, and that is it, or production supervisor. And
okay, I was saying, like, why would the coordinator be there?
In the case of this particular commercial,
I mean, it makes sense depending on who it is and being local and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, you can't put people in, I mean, here, that's the other thing. I mean, Tech Scouts, you put people in a van and you drive them around. Yeah, so now you can't put anybody in a van. So even if you have a crew that has to park, if you're shooting outside and you have to park somewhere else, you're either walking to set or you're going to have 2 people in a van the whole time. I mean, there's just so many crazy challenges. My dad was like, I don't understand why you can't get back to work. I mean, how are you different than a meat packing plant? And I'm like, you've been on set, like, think about it. And having the conversation and walking him through everything, he was like, oh yeah. Okay. So what are we doing for 2020 and 2021 then? What projects you got? I mean, it's just, there's so much of it. So somebody put the Honey Wagon vendors are sold out because the productions are gearing up. That is true, but not because there's so many productions, each has one Honey Wagon. It's because you need now more bathrooms on set for social distance, so they're constantly, so it makes sense those are renting out. Here's one thing about Honey Wagons, and a couple comments I've seen people make that makes me want to strangle them. I've had 3 different people who are working on commercial sets that don't like wearing masks. So anytime they had a break, they would go to the Honey Wagon, sit down in the Honey Wagon and take off their masks so they could breathe. And I'm thinking, thank you for contaminating the Honey Wagon. Now I never will use an on-set bathroom again. I'm going to have to like bring a skirt and pee in the woods and dig a hole. Like, what are people these aren't stupid people. Like, and I know everybody's lost their mind in quarantine. Like I'm seeing normal people like completely melt down. But how do you not think about that? So I mean, it's little things like that are going to get you. You can be socially distant, you can keep everybody apart, you can have great ventilation systems, and then some idiot goes in who might have symptoms and breathes in the bathroom every hour for 15 minutes when they have a break, contaminating the room for you. I mean, that's, and I know that's what Mike is going to address, but there are so many different ways that can happen. It's really frightening.
I mean, the other side, if you have 4 zones, does that mean you have 4 shitters, or are all zones using the exact same toilet? So then right there, none of it matters anymore. And
especially because of the aerosolization that they think may happen, Mm-hmm. It's a hot mess. So I'm going to we'll take a little break for a second. So I do want to tease a couple more things about the Creative Conference. So I think I mentioned Rob Hardy in the beginning. I'm very excited. Producer, director, former member of Rainforest Films, Stomp the Yard, a gazillion different movies. And basically, just like this conversation that's one-on-one, I'm having kind of like these masterclass conversations where it's literally just one-on-one with someone. So you may not be familiar with them, but there is a Christian set of directors, the Irwin brothers. It's actually, they were on the movie that JD was going to do. It was a non-Christian movie, or I guess a family-friendly movie, football movie. But one of the Irwin brothers has accepted to come on and talk about, basically they started as independent filmmakers. They started off as camera guys doing some ESPN stuff. They started shooting, smaller films. They have shot some films that Molly, you and I would not like because they are pro-life. But they have done other Christian films that have done very, very well. I think one of the last ones made $100 million at the box office. So they started as indie kids and they have had this success, and they're going to talk about family-friendly programming, their take on directing, producing, pitching, how to pitch, how to put shows together. So that's a lot of what I want to do. A lot of showrunner, a lot of writer's room, producer, and director conversations. David Bruckner, who we all know and love, of course. I've produced a bunch of stuff for Dave before he abandoned me and moved to LA. But people know him as a director, but he spends most of his time writing. He came out of Sundance and got writing gigs, not directing gigs. And has continued to make his own stuff. But hopefully he's going to show us what his pitch packages look like, put something together to actually kind of walk you through what a pitch is. Right now pitches are moving online. So this year I was going to do a pitch fest. Well, until people actually know how to pitch online, the pitch fest just isn't going to happen. But I'm hoping to have a conversation about moving your pitch online, how to do a virtual pitch. So I'm going to have a one-on-one conversation with David. We're going to talk about his philosophy of directing, just, the two of us bullshitting about all kinds of stuff, but really focusing on, these mini writer rooms that he's doing. So one thing that got real popular last year was studios don't want to spend the money to create a pilot, have it air, and have it fail. And then, or have it happen, but then they always get a different production company. Then they revisit the whole thing. They just wrote the pilot. They didn't write a Bible. They didn't write the series, or the season-long arcs. So you often end up with a pilot that doesn't match up with where they actually move forward. So he was putting together, the studios were doing these little mini writers' rooms. And they would hire somebody like David to put a bunch of people in the room, and they would literally put together an outline for an entire series. And they would decide they're either going to move forward with that or they weren't. So it's kind of a different model. He's going to talk about that. He's going to talk about pitching, and certainly virtual pitching, which I'm very excited about. Who else can I talk about? Oh, iHeartRadio. So this is something that I'm excited about. A lot of podcasts are coming out. Obviously, a lot of people listen to podcasts, some don't. But a lot of filmmakers don't consider turning their films into podcasts. One of the first people who did it, and I had him on a panel a couple years ago, and oh my God, now his name has just fallen out of my head. Thank you. I love you. Brett Wood did a podcast, and we had him out to the festival last year to kind of talk about it. And it was a feature that I'd read that he had tried to get in production and just kept having all kinds of roadblocks with his locations. And he thought, well, what if I turn this into a podcast? And it went very well. And he got another podcast, and I think he's working maybe on his third one now. Then Dan Bush started getting into podcasting. So he just has one that was announced in the trades.
Yeah, he only has John Boyega and Darren Criss as voice actors. No big deal. Yeah, just a little thing. And then Dan Bush has also been working with my friend Jeff Keating, who took his Fight Night script, sold it to Will Packer, licensed it, or optioned it rather, to Will Packer and I think Sony, or it's Universal. But he and I have been talking about making a documentary about this, but then he got approached and thought, maybe I should make a podcast. So he and Dan Bush got together and wrote the podcast on Fight Night, which is a true story, which is very exciting. So, and then Connell Byrne, who runs iHeartRadio, they're going to do a panel on considering, basically Connell's coming in to talk about what makes a good story, what kind of narrative makes a good story, whether it's documentary or narrative, makes a good story for a podcast. So he'll be talking about that. Dan and Jeff will be talking about their assorted podcasts and what they've learned, because it's a fascinating process. I had a conversation with Dan the other day that talked about how he needs an AD. And I'm like, what do you mean you need an AD? And it's because everyone is remote. You need somebody to organize it with an AD brain to figure out, okay, who's coming in, what do we need, all the pieces. So all the logistics, basically. So, having a podcasting AD basically working on all the talent and when they're going to come in and how they're going to do everything. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What else can I talk about? Pitching in a pandemic. Oh, a lot of remote post work as well. So, one of the things that has come back,
audio, post, visual effects. And they've figured out how to do remote learning. Same, you know, you talked about having actors who are husband and wife. This is the time for husband and wife actors, especially for commercials. Again, if you need two people who have been in quarantine together, but they're finding for voice work, they've been doing a lot of that same thing. If they need to bring couples in to do something, you know, or they have, you know, two people who work in post together. So, you know, it's been really interesting to see how married couples in the business might actually benefit from all of this. God, I really wish I could tease the other things, but I can't because they haven't said completely yes yet. But let's just say I might have one of like the biggest 80s music video directors ever, who also makes movie and TV shows. And he's really awesome, but I can't say who it is. There's so many things I want to talk about, but I can't yet. But let's, so I'll be done with that. So, we're almost done. This is like an hour long, right? I don't even know anymore. I always like milk these things when we're in person. So I guess I should ask if anyone has any questions. There are very few people here, and I know all of you, except for Eric. Let's see, I think that's Escobar, Molly, yeah. So you guys don't have questions. So Molly, what, if you had any piece of advice for an independent filmmaker that doesn't have the established understanding of making films like you and I do at an independent level, that are trying to get something up, that are excited and they want to get back to work and they want to create something creative, like, do you have a couple of pieces of advice other than sit the hell down and wait till next year?
Well, I don't necessarily think that they should sit down. I do think that waiting is a good idea. I think that if you are going to move forward with a production, you know, make it with people that you trust and know, and don't post anything about it online, you know, until after it's done, including pictures from sets, because, you know, it opens you up to people to pick apart what you're doing. You know, those people that are shooting little indie things and posting lots of pictures of people that are not wearing masks or not social distancing, like, people make note of that stuff and are talking about it, and you're going to have a really hard time making stuff in the future with anybody of note, you know. So, you know, there are lots of possibilities of things that you can be doing right now. You know, figure out how to tell stories inside your house or with the resources that you have access to, or the people that are within your quarantine bubble, you know, explore those kinds of things.
I think I just want to stop right there. I think that's really important, because earlier you said people that you trust.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, like, there are people who I thought I could trust.
Yeah.
And I've seen them breaking their quarantine bubbles. You know, I've had friends who are planning on going on vacation with lifelong friends of theirs who they found out a week before they went on vacation they had been exposed to COVID and didn't tell anybody, and they were going to go on vacation with them. You know, so, you know, be careful, you know, just because they're your friend and you like them and you think they're smart and you think they're quarantining, like, be real careful about that. Because, you know, even my neighbors, like when we came back to Atlanta, knowing that we were in Florida and in our own little, they're like, oh, we can trust you. I'm like, I don't trust anybody. I'm not getting within 6 feet of you. No, I mean, I know you've been quarantining and I do trust you, but again, it's just so easy. A workman comes to your house for 15 minutes. That's how my cousin ended up in the hospital for 19 days, had a C-section and didn't see her firstborn son for 11 days, and then was on oxygen for a week after she came home. Because a workman came to the house for 15 minutes, you know, and they didn't know he was sick. It's just so easy. Everybody has, you know, be careful who you trust. Like, I think the people who are in your quarantine bubble are a little bit more reliable. The people you see every day, you know, not the people who you were trusting on social media. You know, be careful who you trust, people.
Yeah. And the other thing though is this has actually been a really interesting creative time, in the sense that, like, you know, I've been able to get people to read scripts that I wouldn't normally have access to. I've been able to get time, you know, getting one-on-one feedback on projects that I wouldn't normally be able to. I'm spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to motivate myself to write during this time, how to stay focused, how to utilize my time. And some days you just can't, and you have to like let go of the guilt that you can't get anything done that day and just like go with it. Because mental health is obviously like the single most important thing. With Film Impact Georgia, we've tried to utilize this time to try to use our time to help people get access to people that they wouldn't normally be able to. Like we, on our Ask a Pro Anything series, we got James Ponzolt, as a guest. We had Paige Simpson a couple of weeks ago. This coming week, we have Jennifer Fong, who she directed The Expanse and The Boys and stuff like that. We're trying to do things like that. We have our Eventive website, and I suggest people go check out Film Impact Georgia and see like our memberships and what you have access to, with that. Because it's really important. It's always been really important to us to keep the barriers of entry very low, so that, like the cost of those things are all really, really, really low during this time. It's just figuring out how to utilize this time. And you can write by yourself, you can get feedback, you can do cast readings, get a bunch of actors to like read your script on a Zoom. Like there's lots of stuff we can be doing there in this time, because this isn't the way it's always going to be. And I think that trying to hold on to the normal is what is keeping us from moving forward. Like it's not going to be that same, but it's also not always going to be this way. And we can do, like, you can do lots of really cool quarantine storytelling.
Did you see the thing that I posted about Garfield that I went off on that was so fabulous? Oh my God, I'm gonna have to post it. So there's this group of women, this was early on, very early on. This group of women who aren't in the film business, or a group of co-workers, would get together to try to see who could do the best PowerPoint presentation. Mm-hmm. And this girl did one on the conspiracy theory behind Garfield, the one of the missing dad characters in Garfield in the beginning. It's the best. Like I kept saying, people are going to come up with really interesting ways to tell stories in quarantine. And that was the first one I saw that blew my mind. I mean, I am a Garfield fan. Like I got kicked out of, math class, like freshman year in high school. Cause like there was a Garfield cartoon where he was like hanging and then it slams and he's just like, ouch, ouch, ouch. And I don't know why, it just made me laugh. And I couldn't, one of those moments where like, you can't stop. I literally got kicked out of class for Garfield. So I was like, okay, I'll watch this. And at first you're just like, oh, this girl is crazy. I think it's actually called like The Conspiracy of Garfield, or Am I Going Crazy in Quarantine or something. But it was brilliant storytelling. And you're kind of watching this going like, oh God, is this true? But as she goes through it, it's amazing what crazy rabbit hole this woman fell down for 60 hours and then came out at the end and just hit you with like a brilliant closer. And it was just such a fascinating way to tell stories. And to me, this is a time where everybody could be super creative. Yeah. I think what you said about understanding that you can't go back to normal. I think that's why for me, quarantine has been so delightful, because I already know I'm screwed. Like nothing, I can't teach classes because it's unethical for me to teach classes about how to get into a film industry when one doesn't exist. I'm not getting in a room with 100 people and teaching the PA Academy and flying people in from all over the country and all over the world. Like my 2020 is dead. So I'm all about like, well, what have I not done for 25 years while I was in the film industry? I've never painted the inside of my house. I don't think I've probably really done a good spring cleaning for a few years. I got storage spaces to get rid of. You've been getting rid of storage stuff. I got an ad, it's like, if you stop the depression, woe is me, what am I going to do? And just take baby steps every day to move forward. Like,
yeah, but it's about the baby steps. It's about just figuring out how to make your time productive and forgiving yourself when you can't be. 100%.
Oh, yeah. You have to have that. I mean, JD does, like, I can tell he wakes up in the morning and I can look at his face and go, okay, well, there will be nothing productive out of him today. And then I just go on my merry way with my projects. So there was something else you said that made me think of something interesting, but I can't remember what it was. But anyway, I guess well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I have a quarantine thing to recommend to people to watch. I know not everybody subscribes to Shudder, but Shudder's where you get to see Creepshow, which is made here in Atlanta. But so Shudder actually released a horror movie called Host that is shot in quarantine. And I swear to God, I was not interested. I wasn't going to watch it. I was like, oh, a gimmicky quarantine horror film. And then all my horror people that I follow on Twitter were like freaking out about it actually being a really solid horror movie. And I watched it and it's like brilliant, like just amazingly brilliant. And I'm not going to say like what it's about, but anybody that's interested in horror films should watch Host on Shudder. Like it's the smartest way that I've seen like this whole thing be used. 100%.
Until you look up on YouTube Garfield and the quarantine thing, and then you'll be like, oh my God, that's so brilliant. Well, thank you for the few people that came out to hear Molly and I chat. Hopefully you're not too depressed after our conversation. But do know that the Creative Conference, normally it only takes place over 5 days. But this year I'm going to probably be using some Saturdays, maybe a Sunday. You know, there's a lot of people, like you said, that I have access to that I didn't have access to before that would be too busy. So I'm reaching out to a lot more marquee talent in hopes that we can get them as well, because they have the ability now where they may not be in production. Or like Rob, he's like, well, I'm gonna be in quarantine, so on a Saturday I got nothing to do, I'm just sitting in my hotel room, you know. So I think, you know, the festival has one thing I learned about the festival today, because I was asking, you know, normally we have 50% of our films are made by female filmmakers and about 30% usually filmmakers of color. This year we have 50%, over 50% female filmmakers and over 50% filmmakers of color. So I'm very, very, very excited about that, and hope that the Creative Conference is as representative. It should be. I always work very hard to make sure it is. But, you know, again, we will have a lot more master classes, less panels. It's just too chaotic to have 50 people, 4 people. So it's conversations, it's some workshops. We have a fabulous workshop on composition, how to compose for film and television commercials. So I'm very excited about that. But all our announcement on the Creative Conference will come out in about 2 weeks. You know, there will be less panels, I think. I don't know about you guys, but I know everybody's kind of getting sick of Zoom calls. So I understand that trying to do 8 panels a day and having somebody like commit to that is just a little bit much. So we will have less panels this year, but hopefully they will be of greater creative value and focus really again on the basics: show running, writing, producing, directing, and then a lot of COVID conversations. And I love the dude sitting in his own house with the mask on, by the way. And if you're in a coffee shop though, get out of there, buddy.
I think that's Chris Escobar.
Is that Escobar?
It is. I'm here. Hi, everybody. I'm here working on getting the plaza reopened sometime in the near future. But I just wanted to say to Linda and Molly, thank y'all so much for your time and your honesty and your candor and sharing your personal stories and all that. Because I think, you know, people far too often only have access to platitudes and generalities. So I just want to thank y'all for being you and doing it unapologetically.
And thank you. And hopefully you will be as pleased, because that is exactly what the rest of the Creative Conference is going to be: honesty and unvarnished truth.
Good.
All right. Well, stay safe out there, Chris.
Yeah.
And by the way, I have my Arland up here too.
Oh, nice.
Downstream International Film Festival. Greatest Arland thing. I mean, how cool is that? This is why I pushed so hard for you guys to get Arland involved, because I thought you guys could do cool awards like this. I mean, a fish, me. I love fishing. A fish with a camera. Greatest thing ever.
I love it.
I love Arland. All right, guys. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Molly. Thank you guys for coming. Check into the little chat thing, because everybody posted some stuff for people. And y'all have a fabulous evening. Thank you.